Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed. Hi, welcome to Writers in Focus. I'm your host, James Taylor, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Dr. Sheri Joseph. May I call you Sheri?
Please do.
By way of introduction, Sheri Joseph is here to talk about her latest novel, Where You Can Find Me. Sheri has a doctorate in English and teaches creative writing at Georgia State University, where she serves as the fiction editor for 5 Points magazine. Her first book, Bear Me Safely Over, is a cycle of short stories that can be read as a novel. Wonderful book. Her second book, the novel Stray, continues the examination of two principal characters in Bear Me Safely Over. Her work has been lauded by the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, a book list, among other review sources. And she has won prestigious writing awards. This goes on, you know that? And she has won prestigious writing awards, fellowships, and residences throughout the country. And I must say, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, I feel like a Johnny-come-lately coming to your work. You astound me. My head is percolating with this novel, Where You Can Find Me. Haven't finished yet. Sheri's stories have appeared in Kenyon Review, the Georgia Review, Shenandoah, the Virginia Quarterly Review, and please, let's get started. I haven't been this enthusiastic about an author in a long time. You combine serious fiction, literary fiction, popular fiction, a thriller, contemporary themes. What a terrific book. So where shall we begin? Let's see. Let's start with the characters. Okay. I'll get you started. Got a nice couple living in Atlanta, in their 30s, Marlene and Jeff Vincent. They've suffered this unthinkable tragedy. Their son has been missing since he was 11 years old, kidnapped, presumed dead, and suddenly he shows up. Take it from there. Is that okay?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the book begins after Caleb has already been found. So it's not that kind of thriller where we're really following the kidnapping story. So that's the initial situation. The house is in the suburbs of Atlanta, and it's essentially under siege at the beginning of the book. There are news crews parked outside. It's one of those stories.
The paparazzi, everybody
right,
there. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so it's a closed environment at the beginning where the family is attempting to come to terms with this son who has aged. At the least, he has aged 3 years since they have seen him last, and been through an experience that they're not. It's fairly mysterious at the beginning of the book exactly what he has been through. His parents don't know the full story yet, so the book becomes largely about the process of them trying to get to know him and find out what he has been through.
You know, it occurred to me that there's a little bit of Henry James's turn of the screw in this, because when you're writing about Caleb, he reveals a little bit, and the parents react, and then how the parents react sends shivers up the reader's spine. For instance, Marlena, the mother, has always believed her son is alive. The son's gone for 3 years. And the father, nice guy, we'll talk about him later, computer engineer. We used to call him straight in the 1960s. And the guy's really straight, but he's a provider. And he says, get with it to his wife. He'll never come back. He's dead. What's the mother to think of a father who's given up on their child? And here I am telling you about it. I'm excited about the book. Okay, so they're in Atlanta. Marlena says, come on, you've got a mother in Costa Rica running this, used to be a famous restaurant inn on the side of a hill called the Finca de Aguilar, or something like that. And my Spanish is horrible. Tell me more, because obviously I've read the book. I want people to think this is great.
Okay, so
this knocks me out.
Thank you so much. the situation with the family, I want this to be a fairly, there's a lot of complicated history behind not just Caleb's disappearance, but behind the relationship with Jeff's mother, who is now living in Costa Rica. There's been some tension in the past between Marlene especially and Hilda, who has sort of gone through a shift in late life in which she began to do a lot of traveling and ended up on the edge of the Continental Divide in Costa Rica, having bought this piece of property in the cloud forest. It's an old hotel that she has really vague plans for how she might use it in the future, but she's living in it now and she has all of this space, and so that's a sort of impulsive decision on Marlene's part.
Geography becomes essential to the plot. Could you? I had to go back to a map, or the Google Maps, and talk about where they are exactly. What is the Continental Divide in Costa Rica?
Okay, so yeah, like the Central America, gets skinny in the middle, and Costa Rica is a pretty skinny country. So yes, the Continental Divide runs straight down the middle of Costa Rica, and it divides the country in two, essentially, and causes where they are. They're at the highest point in the country, the cloud forest. It's essentially the Monteverde area of Costa Rica, and at the point where they are, which is way up at the top of the mountain, where a lot of the tourists who go to Monteverde don't usually go up that high. It's not a big tourist area. It's pretty empty up there, but
which adds to the atmosphere.
Yeah. At the time
is wet and creepy and foggy.
At the time of year that they are there, it's sort of the time that you almost don't even want to visit that area, because of the changing weather patterns are making it extremely windy and extremely dense fog up there, so that there's almost no visibility for a good part of the book, and then the weather changes a little bit later on in the book. But it's a really beautiful country to visit, and it's
obviously you've been there.
I have.
To describe
yes.
it.
Yeah. I came up with the idea for the book, and then I don't know how exactly I got the idea that it had to be set in Costa Rica. But at the time, I didn't even have a passport. I'd never been out of the country before, and so I had to get a passport and go there and see if it was really the place that I had in my head where the book was going to take place.
You suggest so much in the book, and I'm going to get ahead of myself because I'm enthusiastic about the book, obviously. When I read the book, I never know what's going to happen, because you suggest things, you create scenes, you create atmospheres, there's dialogue, there's behavior, but there's so much backstory that I have to fill in my own mind. Now, I have been told, in fact, I read an interview with you, that there's an additional 400 pages to this book.
Yes.
Now, most authors just make it up as they go along. So in my mind, you've taken 800 pages and squeezed it into this novel, because it works as literature. I mean, every sentence is crystal clear.
Thank you. I mean, that's my hope for the book,
okay.
is that other writers, yes, would be more efficient about it. I think of myself as being the least efficient writer in the world. I tend to produce 1,000 pages for every 300 that I keep over my work. But in this book in particular, I deliberately wrote the 400 pages of backstory before I began this book, and I knew exactly what it was going to be, and that it was not going to be part of this book, that it was going to be just the kidnapping story. It's 400 pages called What Happened to Caleb, and so it was a way for me to know myself everything that is underneath, basically the bottom of the iceberg, the part that you won't see except in what it reveals that comes through the surface.
Yeah, there is a conclusion. There is a bit of a denouement. I'm not going to give anything away. It's a page turner, but it's a literary page turner. One of the issues you talk about is pedophilia. Caleb we know at the very beginning, he's been kidnapped by a brutal gang of pedophiles. but he's saved by a decent pedophile. Now, how do we,
Right.
can you talk about that without giving too much away? How can there be a decent pedophile?
I mean, I'm always looking for ways
That's
to
beautiful.
challenge myself. Yeah,
And
with
challenge
what
the
I'm-
reader. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and to keep the reader, I like to keep the reader uncertain about what side to be on and where loyalties should lie,
Yeah.
and to make every character as complicated and human as possible. So there is this one. I mean, there's another character in this group who is fairly evil.
Right.
But yeah, then there is the more nuanced pedophile.
We can mention his name, which is a brilliant name, Charlie.
Yes.
Or Jolly.
Yes. Jolly.
A play on his name, Charles or Charlie.
Yes, Charles Lundy is his full name, and he is a doctor, and he has been sort of removed from society for a long time. He's been working an online job, and then comes into possession of Caleb at some point, and decides to raise him as his son. He's also a sexual abuser at the same time, but that's. Yeah, that's he has this one set of good intentions for Caleb, and Caleb is the one who's doing the seeing of the story. So through his eyes, that man is also nuanced, but also probably we get a much more positive image of him than like we as readers would have ourselves.
Before the reader knows that Jolly is a doctor who attended to the boy that had been kidnapped, and he may have in turn kidnapped the kid too. There's a scene that sends chills up my spine where I think the sister Lark is saying, like, why do you've got scars, you banged your head, why do you hurt yourself, or you used to hurt yourself, why? And Caleb says, I like to get the stitches,
Yes.
Yikes!
Yeah.
That was incredible.
It was a way for him to see the doctor in this group, which was his sort of pocket of safety that he had within one life that he was leading while he was away.
But the engine that drives the book is, of course, Caleb Vincent. Like, who is he? I don't want to give too much away. What is he going to do? What person will he become? But let's sidestep for a minute and talk about the tensions between the other characters. Lark I liked very much. She's a nice person.
Yes,
But she's only 11, isn't she?
Yes, she's 11. So she's the age that Caleb was when he went missing.
Yeah.
So the story makes something of that. And she is a child she's very smart and very kind of school-oriented. She likes to make projects for herself. And so she's the one in the family who has become obsessed with the cloud forest idea in advance, and has made for herself this connection to her grandmother because she's just been a little neglected for 3 years while her parents have been distracted with this search. And so this was how Lark kept herself busy while her brother was missing, was through this interest that she has in the cloud forest. And then when Caleb returns, her interest shifts and becomes him. He becomes the locus of her fascination. So she wants to solve that mystery, but she's also really young to be able to understand much about what he went through. So she gets caught in a lot of misperception, I think, about.
It's funny, it just occurred to me, Sheri, remember that great children's book author, Maurice Sendak, who died recently? He once said in an interview, responding to a question about how can he put these terrible things into books for children. He said, "Oh no, children know terrible things. They hide things from their parents," and that's what Caleb is doing in many ways. He's always saying, "Should I tell my parents what really happened?" They don't want to know, and as a reader, you're going, "Oh my God, what really happened?" But you don't really know either. You don't really know the details. I want to take a quick break from my interview and have you read a small passage, just to give the audience a sense, a flavor of the quality of your prose. It's not all darkness. Your ability to represent reality, verisimilitude. Your ability to just write beautiful scenes is superb. On page 144, you're describing how Marlene first met Jeff. And this is in my backyard. This is Little Five Points. She's a bartender at The Point
Yes.
years ago. And so I think I've marked it here for you. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Sheri Joseph reading from Where You Can Find Me. And it's about one of the main characters in the book, Marlene, the mother, and how she basically met the father, Jeff. Thank you.
Never could she have guessed their future. He had a job in computers, marketing. She, halfway through an MFA and fortified with lofty ideas of her own talent and higher purpose, could not have dreamt up anyone less appealing than a guy who sat all day in front of a terminal in order to sell things. She could barely feign interest in the first sentence of what he did for a living, though professionally, slinging beers, feign she did. It was with some horror that it dawned on her, once she'd given in to a date or two, that she and Jeff were yinned to each other's yang. He, a carded member of the establishment with a bohemian soul, she, a kind of poseur amid the counterculture rabble, caught in one overlong act of teenage rebellion against her conservative upbringing, until she was headed toward 30 and permanently tattooed, stuck behind a bar, all but legally banned from sleep before 6 a.m. if there was a party to be had anywhere.
I love that. The characters are, sometimes the word complicated can be used, it's a double-edged sword. Your characters are so complicated that it's astounding to me, but they stay with me. As I said before the interview, Sheri, I read this book a couple of months ago and it has stayed with me. I still am thinking, like, he did that, she did that. Was that your intention as a writer?
Yes, I would. That's
Seriously.
that I hope to have that effect on everyone. I don't know how successful I am at that and with all readers, but thank you for reading it that way.
And it's not all horrible stuff. I mean, we're in the cloud forest. It's beautiful. There are beautiful friendships. The people of Costa Rica are wonderful people. But then I'm looking at my notes, and then Caleb is given a machete at the beginning of one chapter. They're lost in the jungle. There are car accidents. There's a horse ride that's worthy of Stephen King. And you make these quotidian events so ominous. Critics love to call you darkly incandescent. Is that a compliment? Darkly incandescent?
I hope so, yes. Yeah, I hope that there is more pleasure in the reading experience than the subject matter might suggest. I think the subject matter does scare away a lot of people.
But it's life. I mean, as I've gotten older, once you peel away the layers of superficiality off of families and people, a lot of darkness in everybody's life, and you go for it. Yeah. I'm going to throw some questions at you. Teaching fiction at Georgia State University, the question that comes to mind is how can you teach? I mean, how could you possibly teach someone how to write a novel like this?
Oh, well, you just about can't.
That's a Stephen Colbert question.
Right, exactly. You can't teach creative writing, now I'll go resign from my job. No, it's the work of the writing the students have to do themselves, and we who teach creative writing can sometimes be acting more in the role of coach and trying to help a writer see what's in what they're writing already. There's a lot of craft we can talk about in terms of technique and possible approaches to telling a story. And if you're writing a story that has no plot, and that's because you don't know how to write a plot, we can talk about ways of constructing a plot, ways of bringing character to the surface, ways of manipulating point of view in interesting ways to give you more access to other characters. So there are a lot of techniques that we can that we talk about in the creative writing program, and we teach undergraduates, graduate students, and a lot of levels.
You said something. Forgive me for interfering. You said something in an interview a couple of years ago that I've never heard a creative writing teacher ever say. Dr. Sheri Joseph admitted to an interviewer that you have had pupils with more talent than yourself.
Oh, yes.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Would you talk about that for a minute? Because I used to teach a course in publishing, and people would come in with an idea and like, oh, if I write this, I'm going to be a millionaire.
Yes.
And you got to have talent to do that. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And perseverance. Well, talk about how long did it take you to write this book, this wonderful, wonderful book?
It took me 5 years.
Okay.
It took me a year and a half to write the backstory. So before I started was a year and a half, and then another 3.5 years to write the book itself, which is. I've taken longer on books. It's not the longest I've ever a book has ever taken me, but that's up there, I think, in terms of how long it takes me to write a book. I'm a slow writer. I have to think about it a lot. 5 years also doesn't include the whatever thinking I put into it before I really started the project, which is often a lot of it. Too.
How did you got me curious now, and one of the great joys of my job is interviewing a writer. Like I read the book, and there's a scene where. Early in the book, Caleb has recently returned from his ordeal. He's been away for 3 years. He's almost pretending to be a dutiful son because he's projecting what other people want him to be.
Right.
He's smart, but he's only 14 years old. And he's playing some Mozart. And the mother walks by and says, "We never taught you how to play music." Where does that come from? That's so what an image that is. I mean, did you have that image in your mind before you started writing the book?
No,
because that says so much.
I don't. It's hard to remember now exactly what came where, but a lot of the little details about the particularly creepy details, especially about what happened to Caleb, had to come out of writing that 400 pages for me. So I knew something about how he came to play the piano through writing those things, how he came to learn some Latin and Greek and things like that that come up a little bit in the book and shape the way that he thinks about things. And I'm not sure at what point that image came to me of the boy at the piano. But yeah, it's kind of a key image in my head for the book too.
Okay, and I've always wanted to do this. It's another Colbert question. Okay, so you're the English professor, and you probably say to your pupils, "Read this book. What's the symbolism of that? What is this?" I used to be an English major myself, a Garrison Keillor kind of thing, but your book is so filled with images. The cloud forest is a beautiful image. There's a horse farm. There's a ecologist. There are people who are dealing with animals, saving the jaguar in Central America. And I'm tempted to say, like, Dr. Joseph, as a writer, what do these symbols mean, or did they just flow out of you? I want to know.
Yeah. To some extent, the choosing of the material has to do with the story that I'm telling. So, for instance, my background is in wildlife rehabilitation. So I come at the story knowing that in advance much more than I know who Caleb is through his experience. But that is a way for me, because I have raised wild animals before, that I mean to return to their own kind, which is a semi-parallel situation to what's going on with Caleb. I've been through that process of having this animal that you can't help but warp because it's in captivity, but you're trying to keep it itself. So my approach to him sort of came through animals almost. That came first in that sense, but everything in like the particulars of that story, the particular animals that come in, I'd try to go from the fact itself, from reality into. I try not to make it mean anything connected to the story. I try to let it be itself and see how it comes to make meaning within the story that I'm telling. So in that way, there aren't intentional symbols or...
That's refreshing to hear from an old student.
Yes.
Listen, we've got a few minutes left, and you're also the fiction editor of 5 Points Magazine, one of the best literary magazines in the Southeast, if not the country. Founded by Pam Durban and David Bottoms a few years, about 15 years ago.
Yes.
What's the state of fiction in your estimation? Are people still reading the literary magazines and that kind of stuff?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I think they are. I think that the reading is probably, I think there are probably more people reading now than ever.
Yeah.
I hope that's true. There are also more people writing now than ever.
You know how it's funny? They say the internet is killing a lot of things, but when I first started researching you, I went to Galileo, you're probably familiar with that, and as a librarian we all use it, and just type in Sheri Joseph, and at least 5 of your stories showed up in Shenandoah, Plowshares, and all that stuff. So, wow, it used to take months to get that kind of stuff,
Yes.
accumulation.
Yeah, you just pull it up now.
I'm going to conclude by saying this is one of the best novels I've read in a very, very long time. I think you're going to win the Townsend Prize. If you're at a cocktail party and you had too much to drink and you wanted to get rid of a boorish person such as myself, and I said, "Hey, Sheri, what's your novel about?" What would you say?
If I wanted to get rid of
you said, "Get out of here, creep."
What is,
What is your write about?
Sometimes I'll say that it's about identity. The novel is about identity. That was the central question for me in terms of Caleb, especially.
I think Caleb will survive. I think all the characters in this book will survive. And as you've proven before, you can take characters from one beautiful novel, transmogrify them, put them into another place in another book, and I hope you do this with these characters. I want to see Caleb, I want to see Marlena, I want to see one of my favorite characters, Lowell, the brother. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking to Dr. Sheri Joseph. She teaches at Georgia State University, one of the best novelists working in America today. Go out and get this book where you can find me. Sheri, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed.